I took care of my grandparents for years. Then my family accused me of manipulating them for money. I spent years quietly taking care of my grandparents while everyone else stayed distant. When they died and left me everything, my family didn't grieve. They accused me of manipulating them. I'm in my early 30s. For a long time, I was the person who dealt with my grandparents' day-to-day reality, not the sentimental stuff people like to talk about online. The boring, grinding, constant things. Forms that needed signatures. Appointments that ran late. Phones that wouldn't stop ringing. Appliances that broke at the worst times. Sitting quietly while one of them slept because they were scared to be alone. Being the one who answered when something went wrong because everyone else was at work, busy, or too far. No one ever sat me down and assigned me this role. I stepped into it because if I didn't, things didn't get done. That's it. Other relatives stayed involved in a different way. They called. They visited sometimes. They posted photos on Facebook with captions about love and gratitude. They talked about how much family meant to them. But when something actually needed handling, it circled back to me. Always me. Over time, I handled more than errands. I organized paperwork because it was piling up. I coordinated care because schedules were getting missed. I was the one who knew which bills had been paid, which appointments were coming up, which medications had changed. Not because I wanted control, but because chaos shows up fast when no one is paying attention. When my grandparents passed months apart, I was exhausted in a way I didn't know how to explain. Grief mixed with relief mixed with numbness. I didn't have the energy to prepare myself for what came next. When the will was read, they left me the house and most of what remained. The room didn't erupt. It went dead quiet, and then the quiet curdled. No one asked how I was holding up. No one said they were sorry for my loss. The first questions weren't about my grandparents at all. They were about me. Why I was always there. Why I handled paperwork. Why I inserted myself so much. Someone actually said it sounded strategic. I remember staring at them, genuinely confused, while my heart started pounding. Then the accusations started stacking. They said I had too much influence, that I'd isolated my grandparents without anyone noticing, that being around them constantly must have warped their judgment. One person said, flat out, that it looked like I'd positioned myself to benefit. I told them to stop, loudly. I said if they were going to accuse me of something, they could at least say it to my face instead of circling it with euphemisms. That's when voices started rising. People talking over each other. Someone telling me to calm down, like that wasn't gasoline. I snapped back that I'd been calm for years while they showed up when it was convenient. That didn't go over well. Within days, messages started pouring in. Long texts about fairness. Voice notes about how this doesn't look good. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in ages suddenly deeply concerned about ethics. I was told that if I was innocent, I'd have no problem splitting everything evenly. That refusing only made me look guilty. I said no. That word turned me into the villain overnight. I was accused of greed, of betrayal, of taking advantage of vulnerable people. Someone said I should be ashamed to profit off family. I fired back that it was funny how caregiving was invisible until money showed up. That set off another wave of messages calling me cruel, cold, ungrateful. Things escalated fast. A relative posted something vague on Facebook about wolves hiding in plain sight. I didn't get tagged, but I didn't need to be. People started messaging me screenshots with commentary. Instagram stories popped up about loyalty and blood. WhatsApp messages rolled in asking how I could live with myself. I stopped trying to explain. Every explanation got twisted into proof of manipulation. If I defended myself, I was too defensive. If I stayed quiet, I was avoiding accountability. At one point, someone called me outright and started yelling before I could even say hello. They said I'd rewritten history, that I'd poisoned my grandparents against the family. I yelled back that they hadn't even known which doctors they were seeing. That love apparently had a very selective memory. They said I was heartless. I told them to look in a mirror before lecturing me about heart. Another relative said I'd ruined the family permanently, that I'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I told them that line apparently existed only when money was involved, because no one drew it when I was the one showing up over and over again. Now the demand is constant and unrelenting. Split everything, or accept the label they've already decided fits me. They say keeping what I was left proves intent. That generosity would prove innocence. I didn't ask for this inheritance. I didn't negotiate for it. I didn't promise anything in exchange for care. And I'm not interested in paying an emotional ransom to people who ignored the work and now want the reward. Right after the will reading, the room shifted in a way I can only describe as hostile politeness. Conversation stopped when I walked past. People laughed a little too loudly at nothing. Someone said, "Well, I guess dedication really pays off," and looked straight at me while saying it. I told them to finish the sentence if they were going to start one like that. They pretended it was a joke. I said jokes usually don't sound like accusations when they land. That was the first time voices went up. I was told I was being touchy. I snapped that anyone would be touchy if they were being treated like a suspect instead of family. Another relative chimed in, smiling, saying it must have been convenient that I was always around when decisions were made. I asked what they were implying. They said they weren't implying anything. I said that was a lie, and if they were going to accuse me of manipulating two adults who ran their own lives, they should at least have the spine to say it out loud. That's when the volume changed. People stopped pretending. Someone accused me of planning this for years. I yelled back that the only planning involved was me showing up when everyone else did. I was told I was rewriting history. I shouted that history doesn't get rewritten just because people don't like how it ends. That night, my phone didn't stop buzzing. It started with just asking messages. Why was I handling paperwork? Why did I have access to accounts? Why was I at appointments alone so often? The tone was curious but sharp, like every question was already answered in their heads. I replied to one of them that being available doesn't equal manipulation. They responded by asking why I was so defensive. I lost my patience and told them defensiveness comes from being cornered by people who already decided you're guilty. That message got screenshotted. I know because someone else sent it back to me with a comment about how I didn't need to get hostile. Calls followed, not conversations. Interrogations. One person demanded I explain myself. I told them I didn't owe explanations to people who opted out when the work wasn't flattering. They raised their voice. I raised mine higher. I said if they wanted to accuse me of elder abuse without evidence, they could do it to my face instead of hiding behind concern. I was told I was acting unhinged. I yelled that accusing someone of exploiting their grandparents while pretending it's care is unhinged. Then someone shared a long Facebook post that didn't name me, but didn't need to. It talked about caretakers who blur ethical lines, about how proximity can become power, about families needing to question narratives that benefit one person too conveniently. It was written like a think piece, calm tone, lots of vague moral language. The comments weren't vague at all. People reacted like they knew exactly who it was about. Heart emojis, angry reactions, comments about how some people take advantage of vulnerability and money changes people. Not one person tagged me, but several tagged each other, like I was a ghost everyone could see. I stared at it for a while before I commented. I didn't soften it. I wrote, if you're talking about me, say it directly instead of hiding behind generalizations. That's when it blew open. Within minutes, replies came in telling me I was proving the point, that I was defensive, that I didn't know when to stay quiet. Someone said I was embarrassing the family by bringing conflict into public spaces. I fired back that public accusations don't become private just because the accuser avoids using a name. Another person told me I was disrespectful for commenting at all. I asked why respect only mattered when it protected people who hadn't shown up. That comment got laughed at. Literally. Someone replied with laughing reactions and said I was spiraling. I lost my temper and typed that spiraling looks like rewriting absence as concern after the fact. That didn't go over well. Then the voice notes started. Long ones, rambling ones, people talking over imagined versions of me. One person told me I needed to stop pretending I was the only one who cared. I yelled back through a voice message that caring isn't a feeling, it's an action, and actions leave receipts whether people like them or not. They responded by telling me to lower my voice. I shouted that my voice wasn't the problem, their guilt was. Another relative sent a message saying they were worried about how angry I sounded. I replied that anger is a normal reaction to being accused of exploitation by people who outsourced responsibility and now wanted a payout. They said I was crossing lines. I told them those lines were imaginary and only existed to keep me quiet. At one point, someone accused me outright of isolating my grandparents on purpose. That was the moment I stopped trying to sound reasonable. I wrote back that accusing me of isolation while never showing up is audacity on a different level. They replied that I was attacking everyone. I said I was responding to accusations, not starting them, and if they didn't like the tone, they should have reconsidered the content. The Facebook post stayed up. More comments appeared. Subtle ones. Families should stick together. Greed destroys trust. None of them tagged me. All of them were meant for me. On Instagram, someone shared a quote about integrity with a caption about how some people reveal themselves when money enters the room. On WhatsApp, I got a message telling me to stop engaging online because it made me look guilty. I answered that guilt doesn't need to speak at all. People project it for you. I started getting phone calls that opened with soft voices and fake pauses. People asking if I was holding up okay, if I was sleeping, if everything felt like too much right now. The kind of questions that sound supportive until you realize they're laying groundwork. One relative called and said they were worried I'd been under an unusual amount of pressure toward the end, that maybe being so involved had blurred my perspective. I asked what they meant directly. They said maybe I'd grown emotionally dependent, that when someone spends that much time caring for someone, lines can get crossed without realizing it. I saw red. I told them that wasn't concern, it was character assassination with a polite tone. That they didn't get to pathologize my presence just because they were absent. I said showing up every day doesn't make someone unstable, it makes them responsible. They pushed back, raised their voice, said I was being defensive, and that defensiveness usually meant there was something to hide. I snapped. I yelled that accusing someone of manipulation and then pretending it's a wellness check is cowardly. That if they thought I'd done something wrong, they should say it plainly instead of hiding behind amateur psychology. They talked over me. I talked louder. They said I'd inserted myself too deeply. I said they'd outsourced responsibility for years and were now furious that the outcome didn't favor them. I told them if proximity was suspicious, then distance was negligence, and I wasn't the one who needed to explain that. They said I was aggressive. I told them aggression is rewriting history, so you don't have to admit you weren't there. After that call, the pattern repeated. Different voices, same script. People framing accusations as worry, suggesting therapy, suggesting grief had changed me. One person actually asked if I thought my grandparents had become emotionally reliant on me, like that was some kind of trap question. I said yes, they relied on me, because someone had to. Because when things needed doing, I did them. I asked where that reliance was supposed to have come from otherwise. Thin air? That turned into yelling again. Someone told me I was being cruel by refusing to acknowledge how this looked. I told them I wasn't responsible for optics created by their guilt. The calls didn't stop. Voice notes came in, some calm, some furious. People saying I was spiraling. People saying I should step back and let things cool down. One person said I should consider sharing control of the assets temporarily until everyone feels safer. I lost it. I sent a message back that said if anyone was worried about safety, they should look at their own behavior, because gaslighting someone into doubting their own reality wasn't concern, it was pressure. I told them to stop pretending confusion when what they wanted was surrender. That message didn't go over well. I was told I'd burned bridges, that I was alienating people who cared, that I was making this worse by refusing to soften my tone. I replied that I didn't soften my tone when lives needed managing, and I wasn't going to start now just to make accusations more comfortable. A few relatives went silent. No messages, no reactions, just gone. The rest went the opposite direction and came in harder, louder, and more coordinated than before. The language shifted again. No more concerned tones like last week. Now it was all about transparency and clarity, said with that fake professional calm people use when they're trying to sound reasonable while demanding control. One call started with, "We just need to understand what's really going on." I said, "You understand just fine." I'll take a quick break here to remind you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments if you're enjoying the story, and tell us if something like this has ever happened to you. You just don't like it. They immediately accused me of being defensive. I laughed, actually laughed, and said, "You don't get to interrogate someone and then complain about the tone of the answers." That's when they demanded access to documents. Not asked, demanded. Said if everything was above board, I'd have no problem letting them review things for everyone's peace of mind. I told them they weren't entitled to audit a life they opted out of years ago. I said it slowly, clearly. They lost it. They started yelling about how I always thought I was smarter than everyone else, how I talked down to people, how I acted like I was untouchable. I raised my voice right back and told them consistency isn't superiority, it's effort, and effort seems threatening to people who only show up when there's something to take. They shouted that I was rewriting history. I shouted that history doesn't need rewriting when people have been absent long enough to forget their own gaps. The call turned into both of us talking over each other. Actual yelling. They accused me of hiding things. I accused them of showing up late and pretending that gave them authority. They said I was tearing the family apart. I said families don't tear. They rot quietly until someone stops pretending everything's fine. They hung up on me mid-sentence. Within hours, Instagram lit up. Vague posts about fairness, shared responsibility, and family unity. No names, but the timing was obvious. Comments were worse. People chiming in about how no one should be above accountability and transparency protects everyone. I commented directly on one of them. Just one. I called out selective memory. I mentioned how accountability never seemed urgent when responsibility was inconvenient. I didn't tag anyone. I didn't soften it either. That comment stayed. The original post disappeared a few hours later. Then came the private messages. Not to me at first. To my partner. Questions about whether I'd changed lately, whether I was under a lot of stress, whether I was pushing people away. I found out because my partner showed me the messages and asked if I wanted them to respond or ignore it. I told them to ignore assume nothing and respond with one line. Stop dragging third parties into resentment you won't own. That response apparently set off another round. I got accused of being controlling, of isolating myself, of creating an us versus them situation. One person actually said I was manipulating everyone by limiting access. I snapped back that isolation happens when people decide you're easier to attack than admit fault. I said I wasn't limiting access. I was responding to behavior. Loudly, directly, without permission. Another call came in later that night. No greeting, just straight into it. They said I was embarrassing the family publicly. I said posting vague accusations and then crying about responses wasn't privacy. It was cowardice with Wi-Fi. They yelled that I was burning bridges. I yelled that bridges don't burn unless someone keeps pouring fuel on them and then blames the match. They told me I'd regret how far this had gone. I told them regret implies I'd done something quietly wrong, and everything I'd done was out loud and intentional. The call ended the same way most of them do now. Abrupt, angry, unresolved. Someone suggested a family discussion. Those exact words. Neutral, sanitized, like chaos becomes productive if you give it a calendar invite. I hesitated. I knew better. I said yes anyway. That part is on me. The call started messy and never improved. Too many people. No structure. No agreement on what the conversation even was. People talking over each other from the first 30 seconds. Every sentence I said got interrupted halfway through and rephrased by someone else before I could finish it. I'd say one thing. They'd repeat it back twisted. I said I wasn't hiding anything. They said I was being strategic. I said the situation didn't require consensus. They said I was positioning myself above everyone. One person kept saying, "Let's slow down," while immediately talking louder than everyone else. Another kept muting and unmuting themselves just to jump in with side comments. It wasn't a discussion. It was a pylon with better lighting. Then the accusations started stacking. Someone said I'd planned this from the beginning. Someone else said I'd manipulated timing. Another said I was exploiting circumstances. That word did it. I snapped. Fully. No filter left. I yelled that they were insulting my grandparents by implying incompetence. That rewriting their autonomy just to justify jealousy was disgusting. I said they were acting like people who couldn't stand not being centered, so they rewrote the past until it made them victims. The volume jumped immediately. Everyone shouting. No one listening. I could barely hear individual voices anymore. Just overlapping anger. One person called me calculating. Another called me cold. Someone straight up said selfish. I screamed back that selfish people don't show up when it's exhausting and unpaid. I said selfish people don't stick around when there's nothing to gain and no audience. I said if sacrifice only counts when it's visible, then they never sacrificed anything at all. They yelled that I was attacking everyone. I yelled that they started swinging weeks ago and were shocked I stopped dodging. Someone accused me of disrespect. I shouted that respect isn't demanded by volume or seniority, and it sure as hell isn't earned by rewriting other people's choices because you don't like the outcome. At one point, two people were yelling at me at the same time, both insisting I answer their questions while cutting me off mid-sentence. I raised my voice louder just to be heard and told them they didn't want answers. They wanted submission. That set off another round. They said I was ungrateful. I said gratitude doesn't mean compliance. They said I was tearing things apart. I said they were furious because things didn't revolve around them anymore. Someone shouted that I thought I was smarter than everyone else. I shouted back that intelligence wasn't the issue, accountability was, and they avoided it like a fire alarm. The call didn't end cleanly. No goodbye, no agreement to pause. One person disconnected mid-argument. Another followed, then another. The screen emptied out in chunks while voices were still raised. After that, silence. I didn't hear it from the people involved. I heard it sideways. Secondhand, offhand comments dropped into unrelated conversations. Someone mentioning that people were talking. Someone else slipping that there were ideas being floated. No details, just enough to make it clear things were happening without me in the room. Apparently there were next steps. Apparently someone was convinced I'd cave if they waited long enough. That I'd get tired. That I'd want quiet more than control. That I'd eventually compromise just to stop being the problem everyone could point at. That assumption irritated me more than the yelling ever did. So I reached out first. Not publicly, not emotionally, individually, one by one. Short messages, direct sentences, no sarcasm, no insults. No raised voices, just facts. I said I wasn't redistributing anything. I said the decisions stood as they were. I said continued pressure wouldn't change the outcome. I didn't justify it. I didn't explain it. I didn't soften it. The responses were immediate and nuclear. One person accused me of destroying trust, said I'd blindsided everyone. I replied that trust requires participation, not distance followed by demands. That being absent and then outraged wasn't betrayal. It was entitlement being interrupted. They came back fast, furious, said I was cold, that I was transparent, transactional, that I'd turned everything into numbers. I told them nothing had changed except expectations. That money didn't change me. It exposed what people thought they were owed without showing up. Another response came in voice messages. Long, loud, breathing heavy between sentences. They said I'd let power go to my head, that I liked controlling people, that I was punishing everyone for old grievances. I listened to all of it, every second. Then I replied, voice steady, volume low, and said control requires leverage, and I wasn't the one trying to rewrite decisions that weren't mine. That set them off. The next message was yelling. Actual yelling. They said I was arrogant, that I thought I knew better than everyone, that I was hiding behind legality to justify cruelty. I raised my voice for the first time in days and told them legality had nothing to do with it, that autonomy wasn't cruelty just because it didn't include them, that they didn't get to frame disappointment as victimhood and call it ethics. More messages came in. Different people, same tone, different words, same accusation. I was told I'd changed. I was told I'd become unrecognizable. I was told I was burning bridges on purpose. I fired back that bridges collapse when too many people stand on one side and demand it extend itself. That didn't land well. Posts started appearing again, carefully vague, carefully timed. Quotes about loyalty, about fairness, about families needing transparency. No names, no tags, plenty of knowing reactions. I didn't comment. Then came the indirect messages. People asking how I was really doing, asking if I was overwhelmed, asking if I'd thought about mediation, asking if stress was affecting my judgment. I snapped at one of those, told them concern that only shows up when you want leverage isn't concern, it's strategy wearing a softer voice. They replied that I was defensive. I said defense only happens after repeated offense. More posts, more silence in between, stories disappearing after a few hours. Enough to be seen, enough to be denied later. I stopped responding, not because I had nothing to say. I'd spent days ignoring the indirect attacks, the carefully phrased posts on Instagram and Facebook, the whispered phone calls, the texts that demanded explanations I didn't know. But then it escalated beyond subtlety. A relative, one who had been relatively quiet until now, sent a long, venomous WhatsApp message, tagging me indirectly in a Snapchat story about betrayal disguised as loyalty. They said things I never expected, that I was cruel, selfish, manipulative, and had poisoned the family from the inside out. The message ended with a thinly veiled threat that my choices wouldn't be forgotten and that I'd pay for this. I didn't respond at first. I let the screen sit. I stared at it for a long time, and then I snapped. I fired back. Not just one message, multiple, long paragraphs, precise, cutting, and pointed. I called out every hypocrisy, every absence, every snide remark, every concern that had been dropped on me like a hand grenade disguised as care. I yelled, digitally, yes, but it was as loud as if I'd been in the room with them. I accused them of outsourcing responsibility, of neglect, of pretending care was love while shirking every responsibility they had. I reminded them that loyalty is proven in presence, not outrage after the fact. I called them out for pretending to mourn my grandparents while demanding their choices be erased. The response was instantaneous. Voices, literally, some on calls, some in long voice notes, raised, screaming, threats, accusations, name-calling. They said I was heartless, that I'd turned money into cruelty, that I had betrayed the family. I yelled back. I told them selfish people are the ones who show up for Instagram posts and photos, but never for midnight hospital runs. I told them manipulative people are the ones who paint themselves as victims when they've done nothing. I told them they were jealous, bitter, and angry because I did what they never would. I stayed. I served. I lived the messy, exhausting, thankless reality of real care. The phone calls, messages, and social media posts went on for hours. At some point, I wasn't just responding, I was dominating the chaos. I was calling people out publicly where I needed to, privately where I could, refusing to let their narrative of manipulation go unchallenged. I insulted back everything they threw at me: cowardice, hypocrisy, absence, entitlement, deceit. And I didn't stop yelling. Not figuratively, not in tone. Every message, every reply, every story I posted was a scream in digital ink. Some of them tried to gaslight me, saying I'd started this war by taking my inheritance. I told them no war was started. What war? I just refused to give up what had been entrusted to me. They created the war by pretending their own absence was virtue and my presence was vice. By the end of the week, the landscape had shifted. People who had tried to corner me were retreating, some with their own grudges visible in angry posts, others silently seething. The family group chats had quieted, not because I stopped talking, but because the volume of truth and accountability I delivered left no space for casual lies. The social media posts still popped up occasionally, but now they were subtler. No one dared mention me directly. I took a step back. Finally, the adrenaline faded, leaving exhaustion. I looked at the digital traces of the week: messages sent, replies posted, screenshots shared, stories deleted and reposted. Everything, every insult returned, every accusation accusation met, every challenge addressed, and I realized it. I had survived the fire. The end. Your family are championship-level hypocrites. They vanished for years of grunt work caregiving, forms, appointments, lonely nights, then sprinted in screaming, unfair, the second money appeared. Vague Facebook essays, fake concern voice notes, and straight up accusing you of manipulation because you were the only one who actually showed up. Peak entitlement. You didn't scheme, you didn't ask for the inheritance. You just did the invisible labor while they posted pretty captions. Your grandparents rewarded the person who earned it. Tough luck for the absentee squad. AITA? Absolutely not. NTA. Legendary. Even. Keep the house. Keep the peace. And let those clowns choke on their own audacity. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Got a story to share? Drop it in the comments and let us know which one was your favorite.